Hi, I'm Steven Bartlett, and welcome back to 100 CEOs. Today, I'm diving into the story of an entrepreneur who transformed the music industry, built a billion-pound empire from a mail-order record business, and became one of the world's most recognized self-made billionaires, Richard Branson. I've spent weeks researching his journey, from his early struggles in school and dropping out at 16, to his groundbreaking ventures in music, travel, and even space tourism with Virgin Galactic. In the next 45 minutes, you'll discover how a man with no formal business education, but with a relentless drive and innovative spirit, created the Virgin Group, and forever changed how we think about entrepreneurship and adventure. You'll learn the 10 remarkable principles that drove his success, principles you can apply in your life starting today. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or just looking for inspiration, Richard Branson's story proves that with resilience, creativity, and a problem worth solving, anyone can rewrite the rules of success. This is 100 CEOs, and this is Richard Branson. There's a violence to reinvention. In the Japanese tradition of kintsugi, artisans repair broken ceramics with gold lacquer, celebrating the fractures rather than concealing them. Richard Branson's entire business philosophy follows this principle. When his ventures failed, when legal troubles mounted, when critics said he'd gone too far, he didn't retreat. He used these setbacks as stepping stones, openly discussing what went wrong and building something stronger from the pieces. This is the story of how a dyslexic school dropout became one of Britain's most celebrated entrepreneurs, and why his approach to business remains as relevant today as it was 50 years ago. Richard Charles Nicholas Branson was born on the 18th of July, 1950, in Blackheath, London, but raised in Surrey during post-war Britain's transition from austerity to prosperity. His father Ted was a quiet barrister, but it was his mother Eve who would shape the entrepreneur Richard would become. Eve Branson believed comfort bred weakness. She'd drop 4-year-old Richard off miles from home with simple instructions: find your own way back. Harsh by today's standards, perhaps, but she was deliberately teaching him problem-solving, self-reliance, and confidence in unfamiliar situations. The Branson household valued adventure and curiosity over conventional success, creating a natural training ground for spotting business opportunities. Richard's academic experience was profoundly shaped by dyslexia, a learning disability poorly understood in 1950s Britain. Words seemed to swim on the page, simple reading tasks required enormous effort, and teachers often interpreted his struggles as laziness, rather than recognizing the neurological basis of his difficulties. But this forced Richard to develop alternative learning strategies. He became exceptionally skilled at listening, remembering verbal information, and reading people's emotions and motivations, skills that would prove invaluable in business. At Stowe School, his headmaster delivered a prediction that would become famous: "You'll either go to prison or become a millionaire." The assessment was blunt but perceptive. Richard was clearly unlikely to follow conventional paths. The 1960s Cultural Revolution provided the perfect backdrop for Richard's first entrepreneurial venture. British society was experiencing unprecedented social change, with young people demanding greater voice in political and cultural matters. Traditional media, controlled by establishment figures, often ignored youth concerns. At 17, recognizing both the opportunity and his own academic limitations, Richard made a radical decision: leave school and launch Student magazine. Operating from a basement telephone booth, he began cold-calling potential advertisers with nothing more than enthusiasm and vision. He had no business plan, no market research, no financial backing, just an intuitive understanding of what his generation wanted to read. The magazine's office in a London church crypt perfectly embodied its unconventional spirit. Staff worked for minimal pay, motivated by the excitement of being part of something revolutionary. Student achieved remarkable success, securing high-profile interviews: Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Jean-Paul Sartre, partly because these figures appreciated its anti-establishment perspective. But cultural influence didn't translate to financial stability. While Student resonated with readers, advertising revenue remained inconsistent and costs mounted. The magazine's idealistic approach often conflicted with commercial realities. When a postal strike threatened Britain in 1971, Richard spotted an opportunity others missed. Record companies would struggle to get products to stores, creating demand for alternative distribution. Rather than viewing this as another obstacle, Richard saw it as a chance to diversify. The transition into mail-order record sales began as a natural extension of students' music coverage. Richard placed adverts offering popular albums at prices significantly below high street retailers. This venture proved more successful than anticipated, but also led to serious legal complications involving tax obligations on exports. Richard found himself facing criminal charges and potential jail time. The experience of being arrested and spending a night in jail was profoundly sobering. His mother mortgaged the family home to help pay the settlement. Rather than hiding this legal trouble, Richard later incorporated it into his narrative as an example of learning from mistakes, a transparency about failures that would differentiate him from other business leaders. By 1971, Richard realized the mail-order business needed a physical retail presence. The first Virgin record shop opened on Oxford Street in the heart of London's shopping district. The name Virgin was chosen partly as a joke. They were all virgins in the business world, but it perfectly captured their fresh approach. Virgin Records revolutionized retail by treating it as a cultural experience rather than a simple transaction. While traditional record shops were often intimidating with unhelpful staff, Virgin created an environment that felt like a youth club. Customers could listen before purchasing, staff were hired for musical knowledge rather than sales experience, and the space included comfortable seating for relaxation and discussion. This innovative approach attracted customers who'd never entered traditional record shops. The store became a gathering place for music enthusiasts, creating community around shared interests. Word-of-mouth marketing proved more effective than any advertising campaign. Success in retail provided the foundation for Richard's next expansion, becoming a record label. When his Oxfordshire recording studio wasn't generating sufficient rental income, he faced selling at a loss or finding creative alternatives. He chose the latter, launching Virgin Records as a label despite having no experience in music production. The first release would prove crucial, Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, a 49-minute instrumental composition that defied every convention of commercial music. Major labels had unanimously rejected it. There were no vocals, no obvious radio singles, no clear target demographic. Industry experts couldn't imagine how such unusual music could succeed commercially. Richard's decision wasn't based on market research, it was based on his personal response. When he first heard Oldfield's composition, something resonated at an emotional level he couldn't explain. This willingness to trust instincts over expert opinion would define his decision-making throughout his career. When director William Friedkin chose portions for the Exorcist soundtrack, it introduced Oldfield's music to a massive international audience. The album sold over 15 million copies worldwide, providing Virgin Records with financial foundation and industry credibility. More importantly, it established the label's reputation for discovering innovative artists who didn't fit conventional categories. Building on this success, Virgin began signing overlooked artists. The label developed a reputation for supporting creative freedom over immediate commercial returns. Their most controversial signing was the Sex Pistols, a punk band already dropped by EMI and A&M due to provocative behavior. While established labels saw the Sex Pistols as reputational risk, Richard recognized that controversy could be converted to commercial success if handled correctly. The band's rebellious image aligned with Virgin's anti-establishment brand, and their media attention translated directly to record sales. When the BBC banned God Save the Queen during the Queen's Silver Jubilee, Virgin turned controversy into marketing opportunity, generating far more attention than conventional advertising could achieve. This demonstrated Richard's sophisticated understanding of brand positioning and media dynamics. The decision to launch Virgin Atlantic Airways in 1984 surprised industry observers. Commercial aviation was capital-intensive and regulated, with enormous barriers to entry. Richard's entry wasn't driven by careful analysis. It began with personal frustration when a Puerto Rico flight was cancelled. He chartered a private plane and sold tickets to fellow passengers to cover costs. Virgin Atlantic's strategy centered on identifying passenger frustrations that established airlines ignored. While competitors focused on operational efficiency, Virgin concentrated on passenger experience. They introduced innovations revolutionary at the time: personal entertainment systems, complimentary amenities, cabin crew prioritizing comfort over rigid protocols. Richard's involvement extended beyond typical executive responsibilities. He regularly flew as a passenger, taking notes and talking with customers. He occasionally worked as cabin crew, gathering feedback about what passengers valued most. This hands-on approach provided insights conventional research couldn't capture. Virgin Atlantic's success attracted aggressive responses from British Airways, which dominated the UK market. BA initiated what became the Dirty Tricks campaign, accessing Virgin's booking systems to poach customers, spreading false rumours about Virgin's stability, using influence with airports to create operational difficulties. Rather than pursuing quiet legal remedies, Richard made the dispute public, positioning it as battle between customer-focused upstart and bureaucratic monopoly. When he sued for libel and unfair competition, the case became a media sensation. BA eventually paid $500,000 to Richard personally and $110,000 to Virgin Atlantic. Richard's decision to distribute his settlement to Virgin employees turned legal victory into powerful leadership statement. This established a pattern Richard would repeat, using conflicts with larger competitors as opportunities to define Virgin's brand identity and generate publicity conventional advertising couldn't achieve. Richard's adventure pursuits served multiple purposes beyond personal satisfaction. Record-breaking balloon attempts generated enormous media coverage, providing advertising value worth millions. They reinforced Virgin's brand association with boldness and willingness to attempt the impossible. But these adventures involved genuine risks. Multiple ocean crossing attempts resulted in crashes and life-threatening situations. During one attempt, Richard crash-landed and required Japanese Coast Guard rescue. Each adventure, successful or not, kept Virgin in public consciousness while demonstrating personal commitment to the values Virgin companies adopt. The most ambitious expression became Virgin Galactic, announced in 2004 as the world's first commercial space tourism company. Despite aerospace experts dismissing it as fantasy, Richard committed hundreds of millions to developing spacecraft for paying passengers. But Virgin Galactic faced numerous challenges. In 2014, a test flight tragedy killed co-pilot Michael Alsbury, forcing Richard to confront that his risk appetite had consequences, extending beyond personal safety to employees and customers trusting Virgin's competence. His response demonstrated maturity, taking personal responsibility and committing additional resources to safety before further flights. In July 2021, after 17 years of development, Richard flew to space aboard Virgin Galactic's VSS Unity. By taking the first passenger flight personally, rather than delegating, he demonstrated the hands-on leadership characterizing his entire career. Throughout his career, Richard has demonstrated remarkable ability to adapt while maintaining core principles driving Virgin's success. His willingness to enter unfamiliar industries, challenge established competitors, and take personal risks created one of the world's most recognizable brands. The success of the Virgin Group, across industries and decades, suggests Richard's entrepreneurial principles have broad applicability. His emphasis on customer experience, employee satisfaction, and brand authenticity offers lessons for leaders in any industry wanting to build sustainable, competitive advantages. After decades of building businesses, taking risks, and learning from both triumphs and failures, Richard Branson's story reveals fundamental truths about entrepreneurship. Success isn't just about avoiding mistakes, it's about turning setbacks into stepping stones, celebrating the fractures rather than concealing them, and always remembering that behind every great business is a simple truth. Put people first, and profits will follow. I have uncovered 10 core principles that define Branson's approach to building, leading, and thinking, ideas that not only helped his rise, but also contain powerful lessons for anyone navigating entrepreneurship. Let's explore these ideas through stories, insights, and reflections, not only from Richard, but also those closest to him. Lesson 1. Build the brand before the product. There's a story Richard Branson tells about the early days of Virgin Records. He didn't have a hit yet, didn't even have a proper label. What he had was a name, Virgin, chosen half as a joke because his team were all novices in business. But that name stuck, not because it described a product, but because it shaped an identity, fresh, rebellious, irreverent. The product came later with the signing of artists like Mike Oldfield, whose Tubular Bells became a global sensation. Branson flipped the script. For him, a strong brand wasn't the final polish. It was the foundation. Virgin didn't just sell music, it sold youth and defiance. It attracted artists who shared that energy, like the Sex Pistols. Virgin megastores became hangouts, not shops. The decor was loud, the vibe anarchic. The staff treated like co-conspirators rather than clerks. Later, Virgin Atlantic launched with a similar ethos. Branson knew he couldn't outfleet British Airways, but he could outfeel them. He added massages to first class, ice cream during movies, even flew on the planes himself to take notes from passengers. Even in failure, the brand endured. Virgin Cola may have fizzled, and Virgin Brides didn't stick. But customers forgave the misfires because they believed in the why. Virgin wasn't just another business. It was a challenger, a troublemaker. That belief shaped its name, its design, its customer service. Let that identity guide the product, not the other way around. Virgin Money promised simplicity and delivered it with friendly interfaces and no jargon copy. Branson never relied on market research to shape his branding. He relied on instinct, on knowing how he wanted people to feel, and then building backwards from that. Products might be flawless and still fail, but people don't line up for perfection. They line up for meaning, for identity, for belonging. Branson built that belonging first. Lesson 2. Expand forward as the walls close in. In 1992, Richard Branson was running out of money. Virgin Atlantic was bleeding cash. British Airways had launched a full-scale attack, poaching customers, undermining staff, planting false stories about financial instability. His flagship company was being suffocated. The sensible move? Retreat. Reduce costs. Batten the hatches. But Sir Richard Branson isn't sensible. He's strategic. And this time around, his strategy was madness. Open a new route to Los Angeles. During business crises, conventional wisdom suggests contraction. Most organizations cut expenses, reduce personnel, narrow their focus, essentially attempting to present smaller targets. But this instinctive response rarely leads to meaningful growth. Branson had learned that the only way to escape the chokehold of bigger players was to go louder, go further, go bigger. He expanded as the walls closed in. It wasn't optimism. It was asymmetric risk. Retreating doesn't guarantee survival. It guarantees invisibility. But launching something new, especially something public, forces attention. It forces negotiation. It forces enemies to make mistakes. When competitors started copying Virgin Atlantic's innovations in the 1990s, Branson didn't defensively optimize. He launched Virgin Hotels, Virgin Vodka, and Virgin Cinema. During the 2008 financial crisis, whilst other travel companies were scaling back, Virgin launched new luxury travel ventures. Each time, the expansion created breathing room for the core business by generating new revenue streams and demonstrating vitality to skeptical partners and investors. It said, "We're still here." It said, "We don't scare." And that alone began to turn the tide. This strategy isn't reserved for billionaires. It proves effective at every business scale. A restaurant might add catering services during downturns. A software company might expand into complementary services. A retailer might launch an experiential arm instead of closing locations. Expanding during difficult periods sends a message: we aren't victims of circumstances, we're creators of opportunity. When people see movement, they assume winning, and perception often shapes reality. There's also a practical benefit. Expansion creates options. In business, optionality equals survival. Lesson 3. If everyone hates it, the company is probably early. For true innovators, universal praise should raise eyebrows. Genuine innovation, the kind that transforms markets and creates fortunes, rarely arrives to applause. It typically faces skepticism, dismissal, and occasionally outright derision. Consider Richard Branson when he launched Virgin Atlantic with a single aircraft challenging British Airways. Industry experts deemed him delusional. What qualifications does a record retailer have to operate an airline? They questioned. Today, that insignificant venture has grown into one of the world's most respected airlines. The pattern of early rejection runs deep in Virgin's story. When Branson entered telecommunications with Virgin Mobile as a virtual network operator, industry veterans scoffed. Yet Virgin Mobile became one of the group's most profitable ventures. When he announced plans for commercial space travel through Virgin Galactic in 2004, aerospace experts dismissed it as fantasy. Branson reached space in 2021, proving the concept viable. When ideas are ahead of the curve, they're misunderstood. That misunderstanding creates discomfort. Yet that discomfort often signals potential breakthrough innovation. Consensus tends to produce average results. If an idea appeals to everyone, it's likely because it's familiar. And familiarity doesn't stir the status quo, it maintains it. However, not all criticism is equal. The key is distinguishing between "this cannot work," which might indicate being early, and "this doesn't work," which suggests a problem to fix. Examine who's criticizing and why. If they say the market isn't ready, the company might be early. If they say your economics are unsustainable, that's actionable feedback. Another indicator, a small but passionate minority who genuinely appreciate the offering. They become early adopters, advocates, proof of concept. 1,000 devoted supporters outweigh 1,000,000 indifferent ones. Being early provides the greatest competitive advantage. By the time consensus arrives, the opportunity has often passed. If everyone rejects the idea, it might simply mean it's ahead of the curve, and that's where the biggest opportunities lie. Lesson 4. The bigger the enemy, the better the press. The selection of what a business opposes matters far more strategically than many entrepreneurs realize. This isn't about conventional competitors, it's about the systemic problem, industry giant, or entrenched status quo that's being publicly challenged. A fundamental reality exists: a business with a worthy opponent will consistently attract more attention than one merely trying to incrementally improve existing solutions. Media organizations, consumers, and investors naturally gravitate towards compelling David versus Goliath narratives. Companies that position themselves against established agencies who fail to understand emerging technologies aren't simply offering alternative services, they're challenging outdated system. This narrative secures meetings with prospects far beyond expected reach and generates media coverage that hasn't yet been earned through performance. Consider Richard Branson's confrontation with British Airways. When BA initiated aggressive competitive practices against Virgin Atlantic, Branson didn't merely pursue legal remedies, he transformed it into public theatre. BA Don't Care became a rallying message. The narrative of a determined underdog fighting corporate dominance resonated broadly beyond specifics of airline competition. The genius of Branson's approach wasn't just that he went after British Airways, it was how he framed the battle. He positioned it not as a competition between two airlines, but as a moral struggle between a caring, customer-focused upstart and a cold, bureaucratic monopoly. When British Airways operatives hacked into Virgin's computer systems and poached customers, Branson didn't just file a lawsuit, he mounted a public campaign complete with branded t-shirts, media stunts, and personal challenges to BA's chairman, Lord King. The lawsuit eventually settled with BA paying $3.5 million to Branson and his airline, but the PR value of the campaign far exceeded that sum. Virgin Atlantic became known as the airline that stood up to the giant. This conflict generated millions in free publicity for Virgin. It defined Virgin's brand as championing customers against corporate arrogance. The larger the opponent, the more compelling the story, and the greater the press coverage Virgin received. This principle operates across industries. Innovative electric vehicle manufacturers aren't merely producing cars, they're challenging petroleum dependencies and addressing climate change. Revolutionary accommodation platforms aren't simply creating booking systems, they're challenging the hotel industry's established dominance. Streaming pioneers aren't merely providing content, they're confronting entire television ecosystems. Branson replicated this approach throughout his business empire. When launching Virgin Money, he didn't position it as just another financial institution. He portrayed it as a crusader against traditional banking's complexity and poor customer service. When establishing Virgin Mobile, he framed it as fighting against the industry's convoluted contracts and hidden fees. Each time, he wasn't just launching a product, he was declaring war on an industry's status quo. And each time, the media eagerly covered the battle. Crucially, an opponent can't be just any competitor. It must represent something larger than the organization, something embodying an outdated system or inequitable status quo. People enthusiastically support challengers, but only when they believe the challenge has meaningful significance. This approach requires authenticity. Consumers quickly detect manufactured rivalries or hollow critiques. The opposition must stem from genuine disagreement with how an industry operates, not merely from competitive positioning. Branson's conflicts worked because they were grounded in his actual frustrations with how airlines, banks, and telecoms treated customers. Most business coverage isn't about products or services, it's about narratives. Conflict drives every compelling story. When strategically positioned against a worthy, larger opponent, media attention naturally follows, because compelling narrative tension drives engagement. Lesson 5. No permission required to compete. Too many entrepreneurs with brilliant ideas delay action whilst awaiting something: funding, connections, perfect timing, or most problematically, permission from established industry players. Consider this crucial insight: nobody willingly grants permission for their disruption. The most successful businesses never consulted established companies about competing with them. They lacked appropriate credentials and connections. They simply began with available resources in their current position. Richard Branson's career exemplifies refusing to wait for permission. When establishing Virgin Atlantic with one leased aircraft, he didn't seek British Airways approval. When launching Virgin Mobile without network infrastructure ownership, he didn't await telecommunications industry endorsement. What's instructive about Branson's approach is how he consistently entered industries where he had no formal training or experience. He had no finance degree when he launched Virgin Money, no telecommunications background when he started Virgin Mobile, no aviation credentials when he founded Virgin Atlantic. This seemingly reckless approach, entering established industries as an outsider, became a strategic advantage. The very practices industry veterans considered essential were often the same ones frustrating customers. The reality is clear: if pursuing genuine innovation, established powers will never grant permission. They'll explain why it cannot or shouldn't be done, or why the person attempting it is unsuitable. To break free from permission seeking, recognize that requiring permission often represents fear disguised as prudence. It becomes a method for delaying action by pretending external authorization is necessary. Branson's confidence came not from arrogance, but from recognizing a fundamental truth: established requirements often protect mediocrity rather than ensure quality. Credentials demanded by incumbents frequently have more to do with maintaining barriers than serving customers. This perspective doesn't suggest ignoring regulations. Distinguish between not requesting permission and violating legitimate rules. Many business rules are merely norms and traditions masquerading as requirements. Those who seek permission position themselves as supplicants, grateful for any opportunity granted. Those who proceed without permission position themselves as disruptors, confident in their right to participate. Every industry's status quo was created by people no more intelligent than current entrepreneurs. Existing players possess no greater market entitlement. Their advantage lies in presence, but the advantage of newcomers lies in perceiving opportunities others cannot see. Lesson 6. Trust instinct, not CVs. After analyzing hundreds of successful entrepreneurs and business leaders, a pattern emerges. Their best decisions often contradicted expert advice. They trusted their intuition when it diverged from impressive credentials and prestigious opinions. This isn't about stubbornness or dismissing expertise. It's about recognizing when instinct detects something that credentials overlook. Being surrounded by individuals with superior education and more experience can be intimidating. Their advice sounds logical, supported by case studies and established practices. Yet occasionally, something suggests this approach doesn't align with our circumstances. The occasions when that inner voice gets ignored to follow expert guidance frequently result in significant missteps. Conversely, trusting that instinct, even when it can't be fully articulated, often leads to the greatest successes. Richard Branson exemplifies this principle. When deciding to establish an airline, launch a mobile network without infrastructure, or install beds in business class, experts predicted failure. But his instinct for what customers truly desired repeatedly trumped expert consensus. This dynamic played out dramatically when Branson chose to distribute Tubular Bells, Mike Oldfield's instrumental album rejected by every major label. Despite no experience in music production, something in the music resonated with him. It sold over 15 million copies and built the financial foundation for Virgin. Credentials often reflect past achievements, not future insights. Experts excel at explaining previous successes but can struggle with emerging opportunities. Meanwhile, instinct is pattern recognition below conscious awareness. This becomes crucial during market transitions. When landscapes evolve, experience from previous paradigms can become a liability. Fresh perspective may better perceive new realities. Branson's dyslexia may have strengthened this. Unable to process complex reports traditionally, he developed extraordinary skills in reading people, sensing opportunities, and trusting emotional responses. Every truly innovative idea initially sounded incorrect to experts. When attempting something unprecedented, a moment always arrives when instinct must outweigh someone else's experience. Intuition might be seeing the future, but their CV just reflects the past. Lesson 7. Founder energy is irreplaceable. Many investors and business advisors believe that founders should step aside as their companies grow, replaced by professional managers with traditional business backgrounds. This is a harmful myth. When founders are pushed out, companies often lose the vision, passion, and the innovative thinking that made them successful in the first place. Investors repeatedly suggest replacing founders with a seasoned CEO. They measure capabilities by conventional criteria, ignoring that founder energy is the most valuable and irreplaceable asset companies possess. Richard Branson exemplifies this. The Virgin Group isn't powered merely by business models, it's driven by Branson's distinctive vision and energy. When Virgin Atlantic battled British Airways, it wasn't just about planes, it was Branson's relentless founder energy versus corporate bureaucracy. But what makes founder energy so valuable? First, there's commitment. For managers, a company is a career. For founders, it's identity. This creates a different level of dedication. When Virgin Atlantic faced bankruptcy, advisors suggested shutting down. Branson sold Virgin Records, his first empire, to save the airline. It wasn't just business. It was personal. Founders contribute what hired managers can't replicate. They don't need value statements, they live the mission. They think long-term, play infinite games, and inspire passion in others. Even decades later, Virgin companies thrive on Branson's presence. His adventures and image aren't distractions, they're expressions of the same spirit that built the brand. When customers choose Virgin, they're buying into that founder energy. Professional managers optimize for predictability. Founders like Branson have the authority to take bold risks and long-term bets others wouldn't dare attempt. Not all founders are suited to scale companies themselves, but the answer isn't replacing them. It's surrounding them with complementary talent while protecting their energy. The Virgin model proves this. Branson didn't manage every venture himself. He provided vision and partnered with experts for operations. That balance kept founder energy alive across industries. World-changing businesses don't just need skill, they need conviction, purpose, and personal stakes. That's founder energy. And it's irreplaceable. Lesson 8. Mask the engineering. Many technology founders commit a common error. They become enamored with their engineering, their complexity, their clever solutions, then wonder why customers don't share their enthusiasm. The challenging reality? Most people are indifferent to how products function. They care what benefits these products provide them. Richard Branson masters this principle perfectly. Consider Virgin Atlantic. Flying transatlantic is an engineering marvel. Yet Branson doesn't market the engineering. He markets the experience, comfortable seating, friendly service, and entertainment options. All that complex aviation technology remains masked behind emotional experiences. Similarly with Virgin Mobile. The telecommunications infrastructure powering mobile networks represents extraordinary complexity. But Branson concealed the engineering behind straightforward plans, transparent pricing, and distinctive marketing. This approach reflects a profound understanding of human psychology. Consumers rarely make purely rational, feature-based decisions. They make emotional choices justified with rational arguments afterward. Branson knew that whilst engineering created the capability, emotion drove the purchase. Virgin Trains offers another example. Competitors advertise speeds and energy efficiency. Virgin focused on comfort, convenience, and experience. Passengers didn't need to understand how smoother rides happened, they just needed to feel them. When Virgin Galactic was developing space tourism, Branson didn't focus on propulsion systems or materials science. He talked about seeing Earth from space, weightlessness, and joining an exclusive club. The engineering stayed masked behind the human story. To effectively mask engineering, translate features into outcomes customers care about. Don't describe a proprietary algorithm, explain how it solves problems better. Don't mention battery capacity, explain that it lasts all day. Then design the experience layer as carefully as the engineering. The interface must be intuitive, frictionless, and emotionally satisfying. This principle doesn't downplay the importance of engineering. Quite the opposite. It must be excellent for the experience to work. But customers should never have to think about it. Complexity impresses, but simplicity sells. The best companies build powerful tech and hide it behind experiences so seamless they feel like magic. Lesson 9. Improvisation beats optimization. Business education typically emphasizes optimizing existing systems, finding efficiencies, refining processes. That's valuable, but rarely leads to breakthrough success. True differentiation comes through improvisation. The most innovative companies follow no playbooks. No models exist for building groundbreaking businesses. They must improvise, experiment, and respond to opportunities as they emerge. Richard Branson's career exemplifies this. When a flight to Puerto Rico was cancelled, stranding passengers, he didn't file a complaint. He chartered an aircraft and sold tickets to the stranded. That improvised solution became Virgin Atlantic's origin story. When Virgin Mobile launched, they didn't optimize the traditional carrier model. They improvised a virtual operator approach. When redesigning trains, they introduced innovations like regenerative braking instead of refining old templates. Optimization extracts maximum value from known situations. Improvisation creates new value in uncertain contexts. In rapidly changing markets, optimizing yesterday's conditions becomes irrelevant. Branson launched successful businesses in industries he had no experience in. He wasn't constrained by how things are done. He improvised solutions veterans couldn't see. In Virgin retail stores, competitors optimized shelf space and staffing. Virgin improvised community spaces with sofas and listening stations, redefining what a music store could be. Successful improvisation begins with solid operational foundations, but embraces creativity at the edge. Optimize back-end systems, improvise where customers meet your product. Virgin encouraged staff to respond authentically, not from scripts. When regulations posed challenges, Branson found creative workarounds. These improvisations led to brand-defining experiences. Improvisational leadership values adaptability and creativity over perfect plans. In dynamic environments, responding creatively matters more than sticking to predictions. The best entrepreneurs aren't expert optimizers, they're intuitive improvisers. They treat uncertainty as opportunity, not a problem. In a fast-changing world, the ability to improvise is becoming the most valuable business skill. Lesson 10. Leave it all on the field. Branson often says he has no regrets. From him, it's not bravado. It's the cornerstone of a philosophy that has guided his extraordinary career. This isn't to say he hasn't failed. Virgin Cola, Virgin Brides, Virgin Cars, all spectacular flops. But his lack of regret reflects a total commitment to leaving everything on the field. The metaphor comes from sports, players who give everything, walk off exhausted, and know they held nothing back. Branson doesn't save ideas for later, conserve energy, or hold back bold visions. He pours everything into each moment with unbridled enthusiasm. This manifested in his balloon adventures, his space tourism ambitions, and his personal sacrifices, mortgaging his home to save Virgin Atlantic. He doesn't just take risks, he commits fully, regardless of ridicule or outcome. Most entrepreneurs hedge, saving energy, capital, or ideas as insurance. But this half measure often leads to failure. Branson's full-throttle approach gives ventures their best chance and brings emotional clarity, knowing he gave everything. His public stunts and near-death adventures aren't brand exercises, they're proof of his refusal to leave anything unexpressed or unattempted. Virgin companies reflect this spirit. They stretch limited resources and launch boldly rather than wait for perfect conditions. The energy comes not from abundance, but from commitment. What makes Branson's philosophy transformative isn't avoiding failure, it's how he experiences it. Selling Virgin Records to fund Virgin Atlantic caused him to cry publicly. But he never regretted starting it or letting it go. This mindset eliminates second-guessing. Rather than dwelling on, should I have, Branson focuses entirely on the present. Energy goes towards solutions, not regrets. Business opportunities are like buses, he says. There's always another one coming. When you've given everything to the last one, you don't mourn. It's already taught you what you need for the next. For entrepreneurs, this is deep wisdom. Regret is the enemy of innovation. The real failure isn't falling short, it's never fully trying. Richard Branson's life is a testament to the power of relentless adventure and daring entrepreneurship. His story proves that success isn't about avoiding failure, it's about embracing it as part of the process. The walls in business aren't there to stop us, they're there to challenge us to break through. His story teaches us to leap into the unknown, trust our instincts, and expand forward when others would retreat. So, as you close out today's episode, remember, behind every great idea is a relentless spirit willing to take risks, challenge the norm, and leave it all on the field. No regrets. Every week, we'll dive into the lives of the world's most legendary CEOs, distilling 10 core principles that defined their success. Until then, this is 100 CEOs. And that was Richard Branson. Thank you so much for listening.